Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, checking your phone, and finding out your country's money is worth 15% less than when you went to sleep. Not gradually. Not over years. Overnight. Every pound in your wallet buys less food. Your mortgage just got harder to pay. Your business just got more expensive to run, and you had no say in it whatsoever. Because one man at a desk in New York decided to pick a fight with your government, and he won. His name was George Soros. Finance history, fact number 7. He was born Georgi Schwartz in Budapest in 1930. His father Tivadar was a lawyer who had survived Russian prisoner of war camps in World War I. Survived them not through strength, but through reading situations faster than everyone around him and acting before they did. He passed that skill directly to his son. In 1936, when things in Hungary were starting to look very dark for Jewish families, Tivadar changed the family name. He chose Soros carefully. In Esperanto, a language he loved, it can be understood as will soar. It also sounded far less identifiably Jewish in 1930s Hungary. He picked a name designed to survive whatever was coming. What was coming arrived in March 1944. The Nazis occupied Hungary. George was 13 years old. Jewish children were immediately banned from school. Then the deportations started. In just a few months, over 500,000 Hungarian Jews were sent to death camps. It was one of the fastest mass deportations of the entire Holocaust. Tivadar got false papers for the family. George was sent to live with a Hungarian official who pretended to be his Christian godfather. A teenage Jewish boy, hidden in plain sight, while the world around him fell apart. And it got darker than that. George actually had to go along with the official as he went around confiscating property from other Jewish families. Walking alongside someone doing this, watching it happen. One wrong word, one moment of recognition, and it was over. He survived. Years later, people would ask Soros how he could take such enormous financial risks without losing his nerve. He'd say that compared to 1944, losing a few $100 million on a bad trade didn't feel like real stress. He didn't learn about risk from books. He learned it when the price of getting it wrong was his life. After the war, the Soviets took over Hungary. Soros left in 1947, got to London with almost nothing. He wanted to study, so he enrolled at the London School of Economics. But he had to pay his own way, so he took whatever work was available. Porter at a railway station, waiter at a nightclub, night watchman at a factory. He once wrote to a relative, saying he felt like he'd sunk to the bottom of society and was drowning. He started writing letters to every merchant bank in London, asking for a job. Begging, really. Nearly all of them ignored him. He finally got a foot in the door at a firm called Singer and Friedlander, not because of his skills or his CV, but because the managing director happened to be Hungarian. He hired Soros out of sympathy for a fellow immigrant, a pity hire. That pity hire gave George Soros his first look at how money actually moves around the world. He paid attention to everything. At LSE, Soros studied under a philosopher named Karl Popper. Popper's idea was simple but radical. Nobody has the full picture. Every theory, whether it's about science, politics, or markets, is built on bias and incomplete information. The moment any system starts treating its own assumptions as unquestionable, it starts to break. Soros never forgot that. He spent years turning it into his own theory of how markets work. He called it reflexivity. The basic idea: investors don't just watch markets from the outside, they're part of them. What they believe the market will do actually changes what the market does, which changes what they believe, which changes the market again. It's a loop, and that loop can push prices wildly away from what anything is actually worth, in either direction, until something snaps. Many economists dismissed the idea. Markets were generally assumed to move back toward equilibrium on their own. Soros disagreed, and then spent 30 years proving it. In 1969, he started his own fund, called it Double Eagle, which later became the Quantum Fund. From 1970 to 2000, the Quantum Fund averaged returns of around 30% a year. The Quantum Fund became one of the greatest investment records in financial history. For 30 years, almost nobody came close, but none of that was what made him famous. By 1992, Britain was stuck. 2 years earlier, the UK had joined something called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism. The idea was that European countries would keep their currencies trading within set limits against each other, as a step toward eventually having one shared currency. Britain joined at an exchange rate that looked too high almost straight away. The economy was struggling. Unemployment was going up. What the country actually needed was lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper, get people spending, get businesses growing again. But that was the problem. Inside the ERM, if you lowered rates, the pound would drop below its required level, and you'd get thrown out of the whole system. And the government had made such a public deal about staying in that, leaving felt impossible. So Britain was trapped. Raise rates and hurt an already fragile economy. Lower rates and get pushed out. Stay put and slowly bleed. Prime Minister John Major had promised publicly that Britain would stay in the ERM. The Chancellor Norman Lamont had said the same thing repeatedly. It had become a matter of pride. Soros looked at the situation and saw something very specific. A bet where the downside was small and the upside was enormous. If Britain somehow held the line, he'd lose a bit of money on the cost of holding his position. If Britain broke, which the economics strongly suggested it would, he'd make a fortune. He started building. Here's something almost nobody mentions about Black Wednesday. A month before it happened, Soros was actually betting the opposite way. He held a position worth £1.2 billion, betting the pound would stay strong. Then the situation changed, and he completely reversed. Within a few weeks, he went from £1.2 billion betting on the pound to £10 billion betting against it. That speed of reversal is what makes experienced traders uncomfortable even now. Most people hold on to a losing position too long. It feels weak to admit you were wrong. It feels like failure to change direction. Soros had no problem with it. Being wrong wasn't the problem. Staying wrong was. And then came the conversation that made the whole thing bigger. His head trader, Stanley Druckenmiller, came to him and said they were ready to bet a few billion against the pound. Soros thought the proposed position was too small. If the opportunity was really that exceptional, he believed they should commit far more capital, sell everything they could, borrow more, put it all in. By the morning of September 16th, they had a $10 billion short position against the British pound. And one detail that almost never makes it into this story. One of the people on the Soros team who helped put that trade together was a young analyst named Scott Bessent. In 2025, Scott Bessent became the United States Treasury Secretary under Donald Trump. The man who helped break the Bank of England is now running the American economy. September 16, 1992, before London even opens. The Bank of England is already buying pounds in huge quantities, trying to hold the price up. It's not working. At 10:30 in the morning, the government announces an emergency interest rate rise, from 10% to 12%. 2 full percentage points in one go in the middle of a recession. The pound barely reacts. Soros is still selling. Other hedge fund managers have spotted what he's doing and piled in alongside him. The Bank of England is legally required to buy every pound being sold. It's bleeding billions by the hour. At 2:15 in the afternoon, a second announcement. Rates raised again, to 15%, in a country already in recession, for families with mortgages, for businesses trying to borrow. The government was essentially prepared to cause serious financial pain to ordinary people rather than admit the policy was finished. The selling still didn't stop. At 7 that evening, the Chancellor walked out to face cameras. Britain was leaving the ERM. The pound fell 15% against the German mark, 25% against the dollar within weeks. The British government estimated the cost of defending the pound that day at £3.3 billion. The Quantum Fund made over £1 billion. In one day. In today's money, that's the equivalent of several billion pounds. The Bank of England had been around since 1694. It had survived the South Sea Bubble, the Napoleonic Wars, 2 world wars, the Great Depression. One hedge fund manager in Manhattan made it blink. The press called him the man who broke the Bank of England. He later said it was the most fun he'd ever had. Here's the strangest part of all of this. The man who became the most feared speculator in the world didn't actually trust mathematical models. He hated them. His real edge was something much stranger. His back. Soros had severe chronic back pain for much of his career, and he noticed something over time. Whenever his portfolio was carrying too much risk, before any chart showed a problem, before any analyst raised a flag, his back would go into serious spasm. So he started treating it as information. If his back was bad enough, he'd go out onto the trading floor and start cutting positions. Not because any number told him to, because his body did. The most feared investor on earth was using physical pain as a risk indicator. Here's the part that barely ever makes the headlines. Black Wednesday probably helped Britain. Once the pound was free to fall, the government could finally cut interest rates. Borrowing got cheaper. Exports became more competitive. Businesses started growing again. The British economy recovered strongly through the rest of the 1990s. Some of that is directly because of the ERM exit, not despite it. A few conservative politicians quietly started referring to it as Golden Wednesday, the day the market did what the government couldn't bring itself to do. Soros made this exact argument himself. He said he wasn't attacking something healthy. He was accelerating the collapse of something that was already broken. He just moved the timeline forward. Whether that makes it acceptable is another question entirely. Britain didn't choose when to leave. One man in Manhattan chose for them. Since 1979, Soros has given away more than $32 billion. He funded scholarships for black students in South Africa during apartheid, when that was a genuinely risky thing to do. He helped dismantle communism in Eastern Europe by funding the flow of ideas, books, academic visits, independent cultural projects, in countries where the state controlled all of that. He funded the Central European University in Budapest, the same city where, 50 years earlier, he had hidden under a false name to survive. He's been accused of running shadow governments, controlling global politics, manipulating entire economies. Conspiracy theories about him circle constantly. In 2017, the Hungarian government put up billboards across the country showing his face, alongside text calling him an enemy of the nation. The imagery looked so much like Nazi propaganda posters from the 1940s that the Israeli government's own ambassador in Budapest made a formal complaint about it. The man who survived the Nazi occupation by hiding his Jewish identity, targeted 60 years later in the same country, with imagery that looked almost identical to what had been used to hunt him. There is no simple version of this story. He found a broken system and bet on it breaking. He gave the money, and billions more, to things he believed would make the world more open and more free. Whether the trade was right, whether the giving cancels out the taking, whether one person should ever have that kind of power over a country's currency. Those questions don't go away. Tonight, when you check your bank account, you'll see a number. You'll assume it's solid. You'll assume the institution behind it isn't going anywhere. Soros spent his whole career showing that every system looks permanent right up until someone with enough conviction tests it. The British government thought the pound was untouchable. He showed it was just a number on a screen. Soros made his money by finding the gap between what people believed and what was actually true. One economist spent his whole career trying to close that gap from the other direction, not profiting from broken systems, trying to fix them before they broke. He argued that governments had a responsibility to step in, to spend, to borrow if they had to stop waiting for markets to fix themselves because that waiting had a human cost. Most of the world eventually listened. His name was John Maynard Keynes, Finance History, fact number 8.